Sky a stunning blue. Their naked branches against the sky are proud, and in them you may see a robin sing. That sight and song lifts spirits from the ground and makes us feel our souls have taken wing. Then winter seems not so especially bad, that we endure the worst, so that our hearts be glad.
During lockdown, many of us started seeking solace in the countryside. The Bath Soft Cheese Company, based at Park Farm in Kelston, has been offering its space to the local community of Bath.
So I'm living in Bath, in the city, and we come for our country fix here.
I was a Bristol boy to start with, but I've always liked it in the country rather than Bristol, because there's more going on out here, and you're only 5 minutes away from the countryside.
There's no cars racing by, no ambulance sirens. It's just so relaxing, and
it's quieter.
Yeah, it's peaceful, it's tranquil, it's fresh.
But mainly it's because it's a good walk. It's a nice walk, and you get a nice cup of coffee and or tea or whatever, and it's a lovely setting.
The Bath Soft Cheese Company is home to the local Padfield family, who have been milking their cattle herd for 4 generations. They take a traditional approach to how they raise and graze their small herd of just over 160 cows, and to the production of their award-winning artisan handmade organic cheeses. Hugh Padfield is now the current owner of the farm, and he has worked closely with his father, Graham, since his youth.
My great-grandfather moved here in August 1914, and of course, the next 4 years in Europe were devastating. But they survived the wars, and actually, being in farming is in many ways a better place to be during a crisis. And we've continued milking cows here since then, so over 100 years now.
If you went back to my father's time, he would have started out milking cows by hand. There would have been a team of people here who twice a day milked 20, 30 cows by hand.
Well, I've learned everything from my father, and very early on he got us involved in working on the farm. We'd start work at 7:30, and we would try and get to the point as soon as possible that you could start work in just a pair of boots and a pair of shorts and stay like that all day long. And by the end of the summer you were brown as a berry, and it just, you felt like you were living the life. I can remember once I was driving a tractor and trailer out to the combine to collect grain, and it was a beautifully sunny day, and I was working on my tan anyway, so I decided to climb out of the tractor cab onto the roof of the tractor as it was going across a big field and lay on the roof of the tractor with no one at the steering wheel for the 2 minutes it took to drive across the field, then climb back in and drove through the gateway. But at the same time, bizarrely, I kind of wasn't that proud of being a farmer. I didn't see it as a particularly glamorous line of work, and I never thought that I would do that. So I was one of 4 children, and my eldest sibling, my older brother, he was very keen on farming, so I always assumed he would take over the farm. But actually my brother sadly died of cancer when he was quite young, so he was 34 when he died. There was a possibility at that point that my father would sell up, and at the time I was working in London, and actually my boss at the time said, "Where do you think you're going to be in 5 years?" And I said, "You know what, I might go back to the farm." And for me, working on the farm isn't like working at all. The first few months that I was back here, I said to my wife, I feel like I'm on my summer holidays.
It's self-motivating, if you're lying in bed, if you wake up in the morning and you think, oh, those cows got to be milked, or they've got to be fed, or they've got to be cleaned out, or they've got to be moved, or that fence has got to go up, it's self-motivating. It is quite a fulfilling job to do, looking after animals. It's a two-way thing, that we look after them, they look after us. You're making that noise again, excuse me. And And so I've always thought, well, you know, farming's a pretty good thing, really.
The agricultural sector manages around 70% of the land in the country, producing high quality, safe and affordable food while playing an integral part in protecting, maintaining and enhancing the countryside. Moreover, farmland is the destination of 48% of visits and days out for families. This is roughly around 4 billion visits every year.
Sunlight falls on farmyard walls, makes dappled shades on backs of cows and timber boards. Now, see a dairymaid with bucket full and fresh. See her pause and gently place the milk to rest. This is how a wife of Bath will taste, brimful of life and earthy love, but at the same time, blessed.
So it's an interesting point about the pace of life in the countryside, because certainly running any small business is quite hectic. So we've got the farming business, we've got the cheese making business, and then we've got the cafe and farm shop business. The first person in is the cowman. So he starts at about 3:30 in the morning. So in the summer, that's getting the cows in from the field. In the winter, he'll be scraping out some of the muck from the corridors of the building to make sure the cows don't get too mucky as they're coming into the parlour. And then he sets up the milking machine, and then he'll start milking the cows around 4:30. So the cows get milked at 4:30 in the morning, and then again about 2:30 in the afternoon. Someone arrives at about 6:30, 7 to start collecting the milk, transferring it across. So they'll start pasteurisation at 7:30.
So at the moment we've added the rennet, and I'm just checking for coagulation. So that's when the milk turns into solid. So it's a little bit, at the moment it's a little bit like a firm yoghurt.
In the year 2000, Graham invented the Wife of Bath, a nutty and sweet semi-hard cheese named after the character in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. While in 2010 he started making Bath Blue, a world-renowned cheese.
Again, the cheese is made in a small way, not a big way. And you're tasting the view, you really are. And the reason we're able to make a living out of doing that, whereas our parents couldn't, is because people can afford to pay for high quality food, for niche food that, you know, that you can see, it's got a provenance.
I think it's nice to stay local.
But we're very lucky to have this on our doorstep, really. Very lucky. Only
Since
really since
Furrier.
lockdown,
Yeah,
to be honest
lockdown.
with you, that we've discovered this. This is one of the only ones that are open that could have a coffee outside or with beautiful surroundings, you know.
Chickens, cows, lovely people, amazing food and countryside.
We've had lovely feedback from people saying things like, you know, your cafe and farm have kept us going through the lockdown, which is really lovely to hear.
Concerns over COVID and the threats to local businesses led the British population to reconnect with their local producers. The Guardian reported that almost 2/3 of consumers in the UK are now choosing to buy produce closer to home, leading to a 63% rise in spending at specialist food stores.
The meat is much nicer, and obviously with the ethical side of it, that's what I like. I don't like to think it's all factory driven.
It supports local businesses, it's local food, local produce, and it's what we should do, I think.
I think what I would agree with is the perception of the countryside being a place where you can relax. What we're really, you know, trying to share with people is kind of this is what it's like to live in a beautiful part of the country.
As people have reconnected with their surrounding nature, national footpaths have provided a happiness and mental well-being boost. It seems that this is one of the upsides to the lockdown gloom experienced by many. The long-term legacy of this newfound appreciation for nature is yet to be seen.
But now I cannot help but say, and you may say I'm getting old, that now I want to savour days, not rush to see the world. So let the cows slowly walk
So, good evening and welcome to the Baths of Cheese, cheese and wine tasting. I'm Hugh Padfield. I am the farmer, the fourth generation farmer and cheesemaker at Park Farm in Kelston. Joining me on tonight's cheese and wine tasting, I've got my colleague Richard. Richard, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Richard. I work for the Baths of Cheese Company in London, and I have done for the last 4 years. Before that, I spent 14 years in the fine wine trade in London, and then through that, I met Hugh and came to join the company, and that is history. But if we start by just having a quick glass of wine. Now, does everybody know how to taste properly?
Well, should we just, Richard, before you plunge into that, I know that's what I asked you to do after introducing yourself, but just before we go there, just to cover off on the agenda. So what we're going to be doing, I'm going to talk a little bit about the farm, and then we're going to be talking through each of our cheeses, both how to taste them and what they are, but also how we make the cheeses and the history behind those cheeses. Richard is then going to be talking to us as we go along about how to try wine alongside cheese and how to pair the wine with the cheese. So Richard, back to you just to talk a little bit about that wine tasting.
Fantastic. Well, if we grab the white, we've got a red and a white here, a Viognier and a Carignan, both from the same producer. Now, the reason I chose these wines is this particular producer, like a lot in France, don't actually own any vines themselves. So they have this great ability that they can go to every vineyard in their region and buy small parcels of land. The advantage of this is, say with the 2020 or the 2019 red we have, it was a hot vintage. And so for somebody who only has their own grapes to make wine, they have to cool them down very quickly. They don't have the choice. So this will give you a consistent wine throughout each vintage. Now, firstly, let's go to tasting wine. Now, the first thing you want to do is look at the top of the wine. Now, this is called the disc. And with the Viognier here, we want a pale yellow, not golden, because this is still tank fermentation. So it has no oak contact at all, which means you've got that lovely crisp acidity and floral notes coming through. Now, once we've done that, let's put our nose in. Really big sniff. And you're getting those lovely floral notes, a little bit of white peach there, a little bit of nectarine. And then the fun bit is drinking the wine. Now, what I want you to do, please, is try and aerate the wine as much as possible. So just tilt your head at 35-degree angle, drink the wine in, and then suck air in like this. Now, what this does, it aerates the wine and puts it all around your mouth. So you can taste the acidity just on the side of the tongue from this lovely Viognier. And then you get those lovely floral notes coming through. Right. If everybody's happy with that, we'll go back to Hugh and talk about the farm.
Excellent. Thank you, Richard. So Baths of Cheese, we're based at Kelston, in between Bath and Bristol. What I'd like to do is show you a bit of a video, as you can't be with us today to see the farm and see the setting. I want to share a bit of a video, and I'm going to do this for each of the cheeses as well, so so that you get to see a little bit more about the farm and about the cheese and about the background. So bear with me while I just switch you across to that. So what we have here is an image of the farm buildings and the cheese dairy and some of the land in the background. And what you can see right in the center is the silage clamp. So that is the organic grass that has been cut in the summer and saved for the cows. And then around that, we've got the farm buildings, and to the left of that, the white building is our cheese dairy. So we've been farming here in Kelston. My family has been farming here in Kelston for just over 100 years. My great-grandfather moved to Kelston back in 1914. Back then, we were tenant farmers. We were one of 4 mixed farms in Kelston. And we were farming about 240 acres. Today, the other 3 farms have ceased to be. And we now farm most of the land that they had as well. So we farm around 600 acres now. We've got a herd of about 180 cows, mainly Holstein Friesian cows. the black and white ones. And we're still making cheese. Now, what's quite interesting is that my great-grandmother made cheese way back in 1914. So if I now play the video a bit, you can see it will scan up and you can see some of the parkland, some of the fields beyond the farm buildings. The whole farm is set to grass because it's an organic farm and therefore the land isn't that productive. Now in this scene here, you can see my father, my grandfather, and my great-grandfather. So my great-grandfather is the one looking rather smart in his hat and buttoned up jacket. And then my grandfather is holding my father as a baby. A lovely picture of kind of three generations. And what's kind of interesting is how little the farm has changed. So we then took this little bit of video in roughly the same location. And the baby has become my father, who's the one holding my daughter in the check shirt. And then I'm standing there with my other three children as well. And the buildings in the background there, that's the farmyard outside my parents' house, have not changed at all over the last 100 years, which is quite remarkable. So my great-grandfather's wife, Lillian, she also made cheese. She made a cheddar, and we still have some of her original notes about going to the markets, going to sell the cheese and days making the cheese. Back then, my great-grandfather kept shorthorn cattle, and over the years we've changed the breed of cattle we keep several times. Today, as I say, we've mainly got Holstein Friesians, but we've also got British Friesians in the herd, and we've also got some of that shorthorn influence and the Ayrshire influence that my grandfather had. So it really is a multi-generational farm, still keeping to organic standards. So organic, I'm just going to take it off screen sharing. So organic means that we're not using fungicides or pesticides, but it also means that we're keeping high standards of animal welfare, and we're not using any fertilizer on the land, which means that the animals have a huge amount of land. In a conventional farm, it wouldn't be unusual for there to be one milking cow per acre of land. We've got about 170 cows in the milking herd, and we've got 600 acres of land. And so the cows have lots of space, lots of grass. The grass is full of a wide range of foliage, including wildflowers, and that really gives the buttery, the high butterfat content of the milk, which makes the cheese extra sweet and extra special. So the first cheese we're going to talk about is the white.
Hugh, just before that, why is it? You said that we've got a mixed. We haven't got purebred Friesians. Why is that? Is it milk yield or any other reason?
It's just as my grandfather and then my father decided to change the herd across to another breed, they didn't wholesale change the herd. What they did was to bring in bulls to gradually breed in the new breed. And so the shorthorn cattle were bred with an Ayrshire bull to produce Ayrshire cows. And then when my father then decided to change to British Friesian and Holstein Friesians, he brought in British Friesian bulls and Holstein Friesian bulls. But you can imagine that obviously the mothers previously were a different breed. And although over the generations you get more and more of a purebred Holstein Friesian or British Friesian, you still retain some of the genetics. And you refer to that in farming as being quite healthy, as giving the cows what you call crossbred vigor, which basically is because they've got a wider gene pool, they are a healthier animal. They're less likely to go lame. They have stronger hooves and just basically a healthier cows. And today we're using a brown Swiss bull. So we're getting some beautiful, pretty brown calves and pretty brown cows joining the herd. And again, that is introducing more of this crossbred vigor into the herd and meaning that we're producing better quality milk and having healthier cows. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
No, that's great. So the first cheese we're going to talk about is our wife of Bath cheese. Now, this isn't the first cheese that we started to make. The first cheese we started to make was our Bath soft cheese. But the reason we're going to talk about the wife of Bath first is much like in your wine tasting, you really want to taste the cheeses with the subtlest flavours first. And the wife of Bath has quite a subtle flavour. The reason, so my father came up with the recipe for this, and really he came up with the recipe because he was trying to create the kind of traditional farmhouse cheese that farmers made before the codification of cheese making, which mainly happened during the 19th century. So prior to that, most dairy farmers would have occasionally made cheese, if not regularly made cheese, because cheese was a way of preserving the milk that for one reason or another could not be sold for drinking. And typically this was because the milk got too warm. And even in my grandfather's day, this was a very real danger. So when my grandfather, when he was going to school, before he went to school, he would take the milk in milk churns on a pony and trap. So him and his father would have got up very early, along with a bunch of other men, and milked, the small herd that they had of 30 or so cows by hand into buckets. Those buckets then would have been poured through a very rudimentary cooler heat exchanger that had stream water or fresh borehole water running on the other side. And that, in the summertime, wouldn't have been a very successful way of cooling the milk. But once the milk had been cooled and put into milk churns, it would then be loaded on the pony and trap and taken to the local dairy, which back in my grandfather's day was at Chelsea Road, if you know Bath. And when he got there, they would take off the milk churns and place those on the ground. And there was a man whose job it was to take the lid off, stick his head in, and smell the milk. And he would immediately know if that milk had started to go sour. And of course, they didn't have refrigeration either. So if it had begun to go sour, they would reject the milk. They'd put the lid back on the milk churn would go back on the pony and trap, and it would go back to the farm. So you can imagine that these farmers that have been up since 3, 4 o'clock in the morning milking their cows, they've just got through the milking. They would have started feeding their calves, bedding down the cows, doing all the other jobs that were necessary on the farm, and suddenly come back to the farm, all the milk they produced that morning. Now, the only thing they could really do with it at that stage was to turn it into cheese, because the souring of milk is the first stage of cheese making. It's when the lactic acid bacteria in the air got into the milk and started to break down the sugars to produce acid, turning it sour. Now, that is the first stage of cheese production anyway. So they then would have taken the milk. They would have then heated it slightly to encourage the acidification, the souring of the milk, and they would have made a cheese. They would have added a rennet and made a very basic cheese, which they would have placed the curd in a basket or in a cloth and hung it from a beam, and you get these lovely round shaped cheeses, a bit like the cheeses you can see in the background I've put on my image at the moment, which are our wife of Baths. And we get that shape by placing them in a colander today, but it's really replicating that same kind of very basic cheese that's harking right back to the traditional cheese making. And it's really similar to how when you travel around Europe, you get various Tom cheeses, Tom de Savoie, and they basically mean the local cheese, the local traditional cheese. And really these round cheeses, the wife of Bath cheese is really one of those kind of round traditional local cheeses. And across the UK now, with Arsene cheese making, there are more and more of these round cheeses, often made using colanders. And I'm going to play you a little bit of video about the wife of Bath. So allow me just to share my screen again. And this will show you a little bit of the making process as well. So here we've got a range of ages of cheeses of the wife of Bath. And this is my grandfather's there looking at us slightly while milking his cows. And my grandfather again carrying milk churns, well, small buckets of milk really across the yard there. But then this is us making the wife of Bath today. So we make it in round vats, and this is after we've added the rennet. So we've added the starter bacteria to acidify the milk, then we add the rennet to coagulate the milk. We also, because it's a hard cheese, we're trying to get a firmer curd. So we also we drain off a third of the way and add hot water to the curd, and that toughens the curd and causes it to shed more of its moisture. So when you're making a hard cheese, you're really trying to do a number of things to try and get more moisture out of the cheese. Whereas when you're making a soft cheese, you're trying to be very gentle with the curd. And then this is just where we've kind of replicated what it would have looked like when they were making the cheeses, the traditional cheeses, back in kind of the 18th century. They'd have hung a muslin cloth or a fine cloth from a beam and placed the curd within that to form the shape. Today, as I said, we're placing those curds in colanders. We then turn the colanders to make sure they're round all the way over. We don't press the cheeses, so it's an unpressed cheese, again, to keep it consistent with the traditional cheese making, small farmhouse cheese making. And then we brine those cheeses. So this is the cheeses being lured into a salty brine solution, and they're in there for a day and a half, and then they're ripened for a further 6 months. So really the wife of Bath is our attempt to produce a very traditional British soft cheese, and hence we've named it after the wife of Bath, who obviously was an interesting traditional British character in a ancient British author's book, the Canterbury Tales. Richard, which wines would you recommend to go with this?
So I've got the Viognier to go with this, and the reason is our wife of Bath is quite rich. It's a full fat cheese, but it's pasteurized, so you're getting a lovely just caramel note. If you just want to squeeze the cheese and then pop it in your mouth, and you're getting those beautiful creamy notes and a lovely, just on the mid palate, some caramel coming through.
So Richard, let me jump in there again, because I did mean to talk a little bit more about trying it. I got so carried away with talking. I didn't. But when you are trying the cheese, much like what Richard said about the wine, what you should be doing is using all your senses to try and learn as much as you can about the cheese. So obviously, first of all, you're looking at the cheese. So our cheese, you've got a natural rind on the cheese. So the cheeses are brushed to keep mold off, to stop it from growing, because the drying is important as part of the flavor development. And then you've got the lovely yellow paste of the cheese. You've got small holes in the cheese, but these are just mechanical holes. So where the curd has left little cavities, they're not produced by gas. They're just the gaps between the curds, because again, it's not pressed, so there are holes left. Then the other thing you might want to do is just bend the cheese to see how it bends before it snaps. It's just telling you a little bit about the texture of the cheese, how firm the cheese is. So you can see with the wife of Bath, it bends quite easily before snapping. The next thing you might want to do, if you're really tasting it, you want to find out as much as you can about the flavour of the cheese, is actually just squeeze it slightly between your fingers, because that way you soften the cheese and you warm the cheese, and that releases some of the flavour. And then when you pop it in your mouth, try and really move that around your mouth, much like Richard was saying with the wine. And then finally, once you've eaten it, try and breathe out through your nose, because a lot of the flavours you pick up are actually from the air around the cheese going through your nose. So hopefully you're picking up creaminess, a little bit of nuttiness, a little bit of caramel flavours, a little bit of fudgy flavours. And there's kind of a sweetness, a grassiness to the smell as well. Richard, anything else you want to say about the flavour of the cheese?
No, I think you've covered everything there. And the reason I've chosen this wine is because it's still tank fermentation. It's got a nice high acidity to it, which means that if you had something like a Chardonnay with the wife of Bath, it would be too much in your mouth. You've got that richness of the Chardonnay and the richness of the cheese. So you want that lovely acidity just to cut through the fattiness, to cut through the caramel, and it completely changes the flavour of the cheese. So if we have a quick quick glass of the Viognier. So have a good sniff. And once again, you're getting lovely acidity, fragrant floral notes, and that white peach and nectarine and things like that. Now, if we try some of the cheese, so as Hugh was saying, really kind of heat it up, break it down. So you've still got that lovely residual flavour of the wine. Now pop the cheese in your mouth. And I think it completely changes it. You're almost getting kind of grassy notes. Hugh, this cheese, when would the cows have been milked?
So for this cheese, so this cheese is about just over 4 months old, slightly younger than it typically would be. So we're looking at kind of the January, February time. So they would still have been on the winter silage. So it would have been grass silage. And the interesting thing about the grass silage is that you might think that, you know, the most creamy milk is from the springtime, but actually because the silage, which is the grass that's piled up in the clamp and kept them for winter, because the naturally occurring bacteria has broken that down to some extent, they actually produce very high butterfat milk on the silage. So that they would have been eating the winter silage when they produced this.
So that's very interesting. Because of that, you're not getting those kind of floral notes you would usually with a wife or bath from the summer milk or things like that.
Mm.
But now, once you've had the cheese, have a little bit more cheese as we were chatting. Really get that into your mouth, all the flavour of the wife or bath. Now, if you taste the wine again, you're not getting that creaminess. You're not getting those caramelly notes coming through. The acidity of the wine has just completely cleansed your palate, and you're just getting a little bit of grassiness from the cheese rather than that caramel flavor. And that's what you want with cheese and wine pairing. You want to complement. So because the wife of Bath has a high fat content and is quite creamy and rich, always go for something with acidity. Now, Viognier is really interesting. South of France, 20, 30 years ago, most people in the UK wouldn't have heard of Viognier because it was used for blending, used in the Rhone Valley for Condrieu and wines similar to that. But then when Bordeaux and Burgundy prices, about 20, 30 years ago, carried on going up and up and up, people started to look at the south of France, Languedoc, Roussillon, where this wine comes from. And rather than selling their grapes to massive cooperatives to make cheap Blanc blended wine of 4 or 5 grape varietals, they started to think about making wines themselves. And this is where you have this lovely, just fragrant, beautiful wine that 20, 30 years ago wouldn't have existed, and it would have just been blended into some Van de Pey, and you wouldn't have got the lovely, beautiful elements that you do with this wine. Hugh, what do you think of the wine and cheese pairing?
It's lovely. I think, as you say, I think the interesting thing about cheese and wine tasting is there's lots of wines that go with cheeses, but it's the wines that really are both enhanced by the cheese and enhance the flavour of the cheese. And as you say, that was quite interesting is the way that the flavours of both the cheese and wine change as you try the wine, then go back to the cheese, then go back to the wine, then go back to the cheese.
But one thing I would say to our audience is please try different variations. You know, some things don't work. I found years ago that a nice old cheddar with a Pedro Jimenez sweet sherry worked very, very well. Now, most people wouldn't put that together. So always just have a tinker and try. You know, when you get your cheese board, have a few wines. You won't get it right all the time, but it's really interesting. And when we go on to our Merry Wife, you'll see how a wine can completely change it, a wine you wouldn't think would go with it. And I think we're going on to the Merry Wife now, are we not, Hugh?
We are. So, our next cheese we're going to talk about is the Merry Wife. So the Merry Wife is actually our most recent addition to our range of cheeses. And what it was I was showing people around the cheese dairy, and quite often I would come across a random cheese on a shelf that did not conform to any of our 3 cheeses that we made at the time. And And I knew that this was basically because the cheesemakers were experimenting and interested to see what other cheeses we could make. And so I suggested that we have a little competition in-house to see which of the new variants could actually be a future cheese. And one of the cheesemakers at the time, he was interested in wash rind cheeses. And so he started trying to develop cheeses, both wife of Bath and the soft cheese, with a washed rind. And initially, I think we tried a Bristol sherry. And then it occurred to us that my father had just started making cider on the farm. So my father has always been keen on cider making. And I think we've got, so this is the Merry Wife here with its lovely orange rind. I think we've got a little, oh, sorry, I need to share the screen. Sorry, let me do that. There we are. Yes. So this is the Merry Wife here. And this lovely orange rind. We put in some apples and a glass of cider to highlight that it's made with cider. But my father was making cider. Now, my father had meant to make cider a little bit as a boy, but had never really got around to it. But now that I was doing more in terms of running the farm and the cheese business, he decided to really go for it in terms of his cider making. And one of the interesting things is his father had bought him from an agricultural market this cheese press that was really designed for pressing cheese, and said to him, look, if you want to make cider, you can use this cheese press to press your apples. Anyway, he never really got around to doing it as a teenager. But now, 50 years later, in his 70s, or 60 years later, he finally got around to doing it. And he'd actually produced a really decent amount of apple juice. And he was trying to refine the technique in order to get that lovely, lightly fizzy apple juice that you get not apple juice, cider that you get in Brittany. And so we said, look, can we borrow a couple of barrels of your cider to try making making new wash rind cheese? And we tried it both on a soft cheese and on the Wife of Bath. And the soft cheese did actually taste amazing at times, but didn't last very long. You basically had a matter of days really to taste it while it tasted great. And then it really became quite overwhelming in terms of the strength of flavour. But the Wife of Bath, with a little bit of tinkering, we decided to press it as well, which is what you see in this picture, as pressing the curds, and then washing it. So you press it because basically when you're washing the cheese, you're taking the cheese and you're rubbing the outside of the cheese all over with the cider. And that means that there's no air drying of the cheese. So it's quite important that you get more of the moisture out at the initial stages. So that's why you press it. And it developed this lovely pinkish orange pungent rind that infused the cheese with a flavor, not overwhelming, but just a subtle and interesting kind of woody, earthy, leafy flavor. Here we are. So here we are washing the cheeses. So you dip the whole cheese in and then rub it over on this brine. And lots of people think that that is to flavor, that it's the cider or whatever you're washing the cheese and that flavors the cheese. And that's true to a certain extent, but mostly what you're doing is you're feeding the bacteria that grows on the rind of the cheese. So it's called the bee linen bacteria. And that's what produces that orange pinky effect on the outside of the pungent smell. And it's that bacteria that infuses the cheese with the flavor that we like so much. So it's the same kind of bacteria that you have growing on a Rebluchon or growing on a Stinking Bishop. And so if you want to try that cheese now, so cut yourself a piece with a little bit of the rind as well. As you can see here, you've got the pinkish orange rind with a little bit of white in the rind as well, which is some of the white mold coming through as well. And you've got the lovely clear kind of whitey yellow paste of the cheese. And if you smell the cheese, particularly the rind, you should pick up some of that kind of bee linen smell. And then if you break off a piece with the rind in it, soften that up again with your fingers, and wash that around your mouth, including the rind. And you really pick up some of that really interesting flavor. a very different flavour to the wife of Bath. Still creamy and sweet, but with more kind of autumnal, leafy, earthy notes to it.
I think one of the most interesting things for me about the Merry Wife is talking to one of the cheesemakers, saying that you will not find this cheese because of our local bacteria anywhere else in the world. That if you moved it 10 miles down the road, you'd never get that same flavour just because of all the bacteria and from the cider, which I find really, really interesting.
It is. Well, so, I mean, as you say, Richard, so for this cheese, there is no added bacteria for the rind. All we're doing is using the cider to wash the rind, and it's the naturally occurring bee linens that are populating the rind and giving it that flavour, which means it really is, you know, of the area, of the terroir. And I think actually it's possibly my favourite of all the cheeses. It's just got such a different flavour and such a subtle flavour, and so and it's been doing extremely well since we introduced it a couple of years ago.
I think another interesting thing about it is we make different sizes of it, and it's very interesting how a 40-gram cheese to a 3-kilo cheese is completely different flavor characteristics and texture. And it's quite interesting selling it that a lot of people will go, oh, no, I don't want one of the mini ones. I have a gentleman that will only take half of the 3-kilo every 2 or 3 months because he says it's by far better than the little small, as we call them, the little donuts.
Well, that's the thing. One of the interesting things about our cheeses is they all take different lengths of time to ripen. So the wife of Bath that we looked at first, we ripen that for 4 to 6 months for the standard cheese. Whereas on the Merry, because they're different sizes, and we're relying on that flavour to come in from the rind. For the smaller cheeses, we're ripening those for 6 to 8 weeks. But the bigger cheeses, we're having to ripen those for at least 3 months to get the flavour through the cheese. And so as well as getting the flavour through the cheese, you probably are getting a slightly more mature bacterial flavour through the cheese. So yeah, he's absolutely right. And which wine would you recommend with this, Richard?
So people might find this a bit strange, but I put the Carignan with this. I think if you put a white with something like the Merry Wife or a Robles or a Stinging Bishop, it's just too strong, and it would just completely overtake the wine. So we've got a Carignan. Now this is once again aged in still tank fermentation, but with this they actually put oak staves inside the tank to give it that lovely creaminess. So if we try a little bit of the wine, and just on the nose, you know, you're getting a bit of red cherry. And on the palate, I love this because you're getting just subtle red fruit, and then that just dissipates, and then you get the creaminess from the oak staves that we've been put in there. Now, have a taste of the Merry Wife. And then if we go back to the wine. And do you see how that's changed the wine? Because the Merry Wife is so strong, it really does change the complexity. Now, one thing we have found out with this, which is really interesting, is later on this evening, when you get a chance, put the Carignan in the fridge and then taste it with the Merry Wife. And once again, it completely changes it. And you almost get a kind of boiled sweet flavor coming out of the wine, and a slight condensed milk flavour coming out of the Merry Wife. So always have a play with that. Try chilling down your reds or bringing your whites up to temperature. A lot of people have started to decant white wines now, which really aerates it and makes it a really different wine. So always have a try of different variations before you find the right one.
Okay. So next we're going to move on to our soft cheese. So the soft cheese is obviously the traditional cheese first made, the first cheese that my father started making. And so the history of cheese making at our farm, my great-grandmother made cheese. Many people might know that during the 2 wars, cheese making became far less common across farms in the UK, particularly in the Second World War. There was legislation that centralised the making of cheese and made it compulsory that farmers sold to the Milk Marketing Board. And that legislation didn't really get abolished until the 1980s. And so although my grandmother taught cheese making, she didn't make much cheese on the farm. And it was my father in the 1980s, with the deregulation of the milk market, thought that it would be fun to go back into cheese making. And he was intending to make a cheddar, very much a Somerset man. He thought of cheddar as being his local cheese. And he knew his great-grandmother had made cheddar, or rather my great-grandmother, his grandmother, had made cheddar. So, so that was his plan. But then he met a friend who said, well, why don't you make the Bath cheese? And my father said, well, what was the Bath cheese? And he said, well, you know, it was a bloomy, rinded, soft cheese like a camembert. And he said, I know this because I'm the chairman of the Admiral Nelson Society. And there's a letter from Admiral Nelson's father to Admiral Nelson back in 1801, in which he says, I know you're fond of the Bath cheese. I happen to be passing through Bath, so I'm sending you 2 of these cheeses. And so my father, armed with that information, set out to find the recipe, went to the Bath Reference Library, found 4 books that listed a rough recipe for how to make this Bath cheese, and set about trying to make it in the kitchen at home. And so unlike many new artisan cheesemakers, he didn't take a course, he didn't go to France, didn't follow how they were making the cheese in Germany or France or anywhere. He learned from the recipes that were in the Bath Reference Library, with the result that quite a lot ended up going to waste. But in the end, we're left with a product that really is a legitimate, traditional British cheese. Now, one of the things that's also interesting about this is I always thought that the French had been making soft cheeses like the Brie and Camembert way before the English. But what's interesting is obviously we've got this date of Bath cheese from the letter to Admiral Nelson back in 1801. And what's interesting is that Camembert was first made in France in the 1790s. And so Bath cheese was also being made in the 1790s, the Bath soft cheese. And it clearly is very much a equivalent to the Camembert, the British equivalent of a Camembert. And when you think about the commonality between the southwest of England and the north of France, it's in some ways not surprising. And apparently there were many places that made soft cheese throughout the southwest of England. Apparently the soft cheese made in Exeter was also very famous, so there was an Exeter soft cheese. And when you think about the fact that the cider is similar, the agriculture, you know, the dairy industry was very strong in the north of France and in the southwest of England. And even the language, if you look at the Cornish dialect and the Britannique language, they're very similar. And so there was clearly far more bonding the north of France and the southwest of England together than I would have assumed, given how long ago it was and how much worse transportation and communication was. So this is the Bath soft cheese. So again, I'm going to play you a little bit of a video talking about the Bath soft cheese. I'll just share the screen again. So yeah, the Bath soft cheese. So we wrap it in parchment paper and put a wax seal on the back to kind of emphasize the point that this really is a traditional cheese. We make the curd in buckets. You can see us here cutting the curd in buckets. The reason we're making it in buckets is because you're trying, when you're making soft cheese, to be very, very gentle with the curd. And by putting it in a bucket, we can pour it out of the buckets, we can cut it in the buckets, we can be very gentle. There's no mechanical agitation of the cheese. And when we pour it into the curds, we can lift it and pour it very gently. This is the letter from Admiral Nelson's father to Admiral Nelson, typed up. And, you know, it's fascinating that, you know, it was around back in 1801. And this is us with the cheese mold. So once we've made the curd in the buckets, we pour it into these square cheese molds. And you can see us here pushing it through the funnels into the square molds. And then we turn the cheeses afterwards. So we turn them once, and then we leave them overnight, and the following morning we salt the cheeses. Now, one of the things that was specified in the recipe was that the cheese should be salted, should be dry salted. So salt should be sprinkled on the cheese the following morning. And amusingly, they then said that the salt should be spread over the surface of the cheese with the aid of a feather. Here you can see us doing it today. We sprinkle the salt on, but you'll be thankful for the fact that we don't use a feather. Our environmental health officer wouldn't be very happy if we were to start using a feather. So, so in terms of the soft cheese, hopefully you've got your soft cheeses to hand. So looking at the soft cheese, you can see that it's got a lovely white mold over the cheese. It's not too thick. We've ripened it in a room with a very high humidity so that there's no hard corners on the cheese. When you make a square cheese, a square shape to a cheese is a very traditional shape to a cheese, because obviously it's easier to make a square mold than it is to make a round mold. But the danger is that if you don't ripen it in a room with enough humidity, you get hard corners, whereas we ripen our cheese in a room with very high humidity. And then when you look at the paste of the cheese, hopefully it's going gooey. If you've had the cheese out of the fridge for an hour now, it should certainly be beginning to ooze out of the cheese. And on the rind of the cheese, you can see there's some places the mold will have gone bumpy, and that's the Penicillium geotrichum working alongside Penicillium candidum. Now it's a white mold that grows on the cheese. So after making the cheeses, we leave it in a room to ripen for just 12 days before then wrapping it in the clear film that you see. That's actually a biodegradable film, breathable film. But what that does is when you squash that mold down, the roots of the mold then release enzymes into the cheese that are softening the texture of the cheese and infusing the texture of the cheese with flavor. And it's quite interesting that a lot of that flavor comes from the starter culture, the bacteria that we add to the mold right at the beginning. But you don't really pick up on those flavors until the mold has softened and broken down the structure of the curd. You might have in the center of your cheese a little bit of the curd that's still a little bit of the cheese that's still quite firm, and it'll be a little bit more acidic than the rest of the cheese. It'll have slight lemony kind of flavors, and then on the outside where it's gone softer, you get more of the mushroomy, more earthy flavors of the cheese. So if you want to try that now.
I think for me, one thing that's quite interesting is that the soft cheese is probably the hardest to sell people, because it's the one cheese where everybody wants it slightly different. So I like it when it's going out of date and it's got a bit of ammonia and it's really running off the plate. Whereas I know, Hugh, you prefer it when it's a lot fresher, don't you? And slightly chalkier through the middle.
I like it when it's just got a very little bit right in the center that's a little bit acidic still, but you've got the gooiness on the outside. So you've got that range of flavors through the cheese. But that, as Richard said, that is the fun thing about the cheese, is the flavor is developing all the time. So you've got the younger cheese with its fresher flavors, and then you've got the older cheese with its more earthy flavors. And I really think there's a joy to both of them. It's really good.
And also one I find interesting, since we've started making the vegetarian version with mushroom fungus, which I find really interesting, because if you like mushroom, that's got a real mushroomy kick to it.
It does.
And I think if you put them in a blind tasting, you wouldn't know they were the same cheese, just with a different rennet.
No, well, I mean, you're right. That is the very interesting thing, is that so we, for the main cheese, we use the traditional rennet, because we're obviously trying to make traditional cheese. And there is a slight danger with the vegetarian rennet. So a vegetarian rennet is really a coagulant. So you can get that from thistles or seaweed, or produced in a lab. I'm trying to remember which one ours is. I think it might be the seaweed variety. But there is always a danger with the vegetarian rennet that it develops bitterness over time. And because a soft cheese can tend to bitterness anyway, we've opted for a main cheese using a traditional rennet. But also, as Richard said, the funny thing is that the subtle interplay between rennet and the bacteria and the mold produces very different outcomes in terms of the flavour. And I find it fascinating, even in the young cheese, how when it's really, really young, before the mold's got going, how little of the flavour of the bacteria you pick up on, despite the fact that bacteria is all there already.
I think for me, the interesting thing about our cheeses is they change dramatically, one through the seasons and also with age. So you're never really having the same cheese. Somebody said to me once, "Oh, but you just sell the same cheese all the time." I said, "It's not the same cheese at all. Week in, week out, it's completely different." And that's for me the exciting thing, that you never quite know what you're going to find. But with this, I put classic combination. We're going back to the white wine, Viognier, once again, because of the fat content in there, and it's rich and full. You want something to cut through it. So if we just have a bit of the wine again, and then have some of the soft. For me, the wine actually makes the cheese a lot more complex. You're getting a lot more, a little bit more saltiness coming through, but that creaminess is still just underlying on your back palate. And then if you go back to having another quick glass of wine, once again, the fattiness of the cheese has killed most of the kind of white stone fruit flavors, and you're getting the more floral notes coming through, which for me, I think that's delicious. I don't know, Hugh, do you like that combination?
I think even more so with this one than the others.
Yeah.
That it really brings out some of the flavors. Both the wine brings out flavors in the cheese, and I think the cheese brings out flavors in the wine.
Mm. And I think it really, this particular wine really complements the soft really well.
To be honest with you, Richard, I've often thought that some reds I know pair really nicely with the soft, but I think this one, but almost like I said earlier, lots of cheese and wines will go happily together, but you won't often pick up a real noticeable complementary difference having eaten the two together. And that's what I think you get with this, is there's a real change in the flavor of the cheese and the flavor of the wine by having them together, really in a good way.
I think that's one of the most exciting things about cheese and wine pairings. I went to an oyster festival once and had 15 different Sauvignon Blancs, all the same grape varietal, with the same oyster, but one with lemon, one with Tabasco. And it's amazing how just a subtle, small flavor difference in the food can completely change the wine.
Well, you got drunk at the end, Richard.
No, I was tasting. I was spitting out.
Excellent. Okay, so on now to our blue cheese. So again, I'm going to share the screen, so bear with me. So all of our cheeses have won many awards, particularly in the last few years. Our soft cheese won Supreme Champion at the Artisan Cheese Awards. The Wife of Bath won Supreme Champion at Nantwich International Cheese Awards, which is a very high standard indeed. And the Mary has also won a cheese competition, but it won I think it was best English cheese at International Cheese Awards. But the blue cheese was the first cheese to win a Supreme Champion. So that's when you come top in the competition. And it was at the World Cheese Awards. So really at kind of the most prestigious of all awards. You can see here the cheese beautifully displayed with our trophy that we won that day. And I was actually at the farm. My father had gone up to the awards and left before the final judging, not thinking that he needed to stay. But I got a phone call from the guy organising the day, and he said, Hugh, I've been trying to get hold of you or your father. Your blue cheese has won. And I said, oh, what won the blue cheese category, did it? And he said, no, Hugh, it's won the whole thing. You're live on the radio right now. So that was an amazing boost to the entire team, and it was it was a huge surprise because we'd only been making the blue cheese for about 4 years at that time. So our blue cheese is based on making on a similar recipe to a Stilton. So me and my father both enjoy Stilton. We had a soft cheese, our Bath soft cheese. We had a semi-hard cheese, our wife of Bath cheese, and we really thought in order to have a full cheese board, we wanted to have a Stilton type blue cheese. And actually, many of the Stilton makers, particularly Crockwell Bishop, they were very helpful to us as well. And when we told them we were looking at developing a blue cheese, and we set about trying to recreate the very traditional way that a blue cheese is made. So a blue cheese is made with quite a complicated method. So on the first day, you make a curd, a little bit like a soft cheese. So this is what you can see in this picture, these blocks of cheese. This one that's just going into what is a peg mill is a block of cheese very similar to a soft cheese on the first day it's made. And then after you've done that, the following day, you mill the cheese. So you break it up into small pieces, and that's what we see here in this picture. So we're using a peg mill to break up the cheese into small pieces, about the size of a walnut. We're putting a bit of salt. So all cheeses need salt added to preserve the cheese. That's salt, something I haven't talked about, but salt is absolutely crucial in making cheese because it preserves the dairy content, stops it from going off, as well as flavoring the cheese. So interestingly, hops play a similar part with beer, that they both preserve the beer as well as flavoring the beer. We then take those pieces of cheese and we place them within the blue cheese mold. Now it's very important to very gently place those curds in the mold, so you're preserving those gaps of air between the lumps of curd, and it's those air gaps between the lumps of curd that allow the blue mold, the Penicillium roqueforti, to grow through the cheese later on and give it that lovely marbling effect, as well as obviously releasing the flavor of that blue mold through the cheese. But there's a however. To make the cheese process even more complicated, you don't want that blue mold to start growing too early, because the pace of the cheese needs a bit longer to get going, to start ripening and start softening in the way that you expect in a sweet, creamy blue cheese. And so you then have to seal the cheese over with a palette knife, and that's what you see here, to stop all those air gaps. And we do that when the cheese is about 5 days old. And so having done that, you then allow the paste of the cheese some time to develop. But after another 5 weeks, you then want your blue mold to start growing, because after 12 weeks, your cheese is going to be ready. So after 5 weeks, to then reintroduce air to all those little cavities within the cheese, we stab the cheeses repeatedly with a needle. And that's what you see in this picture, is the cheese being stabbed repeatedly. And those holes go right through to the center of the cheese, and that allows the air from those needle holes to spread through the cavities and gives you that lovely marbling effect on the cheese. And so hopefully you then get a cheese that looks something like that. And so that's what we were doing. And obviously, having only been doing it for 4 years, and obviously there's some very established blue cheese Stilton makers in the UK, as well as other similar cheeses to Stilton being made in the UK, we were absolutely blown away that we won best cheese in the world. We beat 2,700 cheeses from across the world. And in fact, after they told me, a couple of days later, they released a film about the cheese awards, and I was watching the film, and about halfway through, I'd forgotten why I was watching it. And I thought, wow, these cheeses look amazing. I'd love to try these cheeses. And suddenly it occurred to me that our cheese had been judged to be better than any of these other cheeses from around the world. An amazing experience.
But Hugh, am I right in thinking that we do get quite a lot of wastage from the blue because it is so difficult to make?
Well, I mean, certainly more so. Yes, certainly more so than and the other cheeses. So the other cheeses really are quite consistent, but the thing is that there are so many stages where you can go wrong with the blue cheese. If you make the curd wrong on the first day, if you if you mill it incorrectly on the second day, if you allow that curd to compress too much, if the texture of the curd isn't right when you mill it, if it's too soft, it sinks down, seals out all the air gaps, and no blue mold will grow. So you end up with this very acidic, pale, white cheese. Presumably the origins of the white Stilton that you can buy in supermarkets. And if you make it too firm, when you take the plastic cheese mold off, the whole thing will just crumble into a pile of basically unusable curd. And then you've still got to seal the cheese right. If you don't seal it right, the air gets in too early and it will start blowing too early, and the blue mold will have gone too far by the time you cut it. And when you're needling it, if you don't needle it consistently around the cheese, you won't get consistent bluing. So you get patches of the cheeses that are more blue than others. So for all those reasons, it really is a true artisan cheese in the sense that it's a real craft to make the cheese. And one of the reasons why we needle the cheese by hand, the reason why you saw him needling it by hand, is when you're needling it by hand, you can feel how dense the cheese is. So if it is too dense, i.e. if the cheese has compressed more at the milling stage than we intended, then we can add more holes to the cheese. Whereas if it goes in very easily, it suggests that the texture within the cheese is very open, and it doesn't require so many holes to achieve the same level of bluing that we want to achieve on other cheeses.
One thing I found amazing last time I was down on the farm a couple of weeks ago talking to the cheesemakers is that all the cheesemakers know exactly who's made which blue cheese and which batch. And I'm not going to mention any names, but there was some people saying, he's making it this week. Well, it might not be as good as normal. But I found that really interesting that with that particular cheese, literally you can tell exactly who's made it.
You can, absolutely. And that's despite the fact that we try endlessly to align how we make the cheese, that still it can be such small things that even if you're stirring the cheese, it depends on, if the paddle that you stir the curd with, we're making it in the same buckets as we make the soft cheese in. As you stir the cheese, it might be one stir, but if as you've done that stir, you've twisted the paddle a couple of times, you've gone across, that'll make a slightly firmer curd. It's really small things like that. So kind of almost imperceptible things, but human nature is that if you do it one way once, the chances are you'll do it the same way every time, and your cheese consistently turns out slightly differently to the next person's cheese. And obviously there's always a healthy level of competition between the cheesemakers in terms of who's making the best blue cheese.
But from the recipe being invented and then you getting to the cheese that you were happy with, how long did that take?
So we started making it in 2009. We only really started selling it in 2010. So really only 4 years. And I would say that even at the stage that we won that award, we'd only just really got to a stage where we were clear on how we should be making the cheese. Actually, what was quite nice with that cheese is that about 5 different cheesemakers had done the 5 different stages. So often it's one person will kind of look after their cheese through it. But we'd kind of had one person make the curd on the first day, one person mill the cheese on the second day, another person seal the cheese 5 days later, another person needle the cheese. So then what was nice is a very large proportion of the team felt that they'd had a real input in making the world-beating, world champion cheese.
How many blues? Sorry, how many blues did you taste before you chose the right one to send to the world?
Do you know that we only tasted 2 that we thought there were 2 really good cheeses, and that was the 5th person. So we tasted 2 cheeses, and it was another of the cheesemakers. The 5th cheesemaker said to me, "I definitely think we should send that one." And so it felt like at the time we had 5 cheesemakers, so all 5 of them had an input in choosing and making sure we won the World Cheese Awards, which was great. But I mean, what I think is healthy is that we all make all the cheeses, and so that means that that we have quite a rounded level of knowledge. Quite early on, we made the decision not to have one cheesemaker make one cheese, that all the cheesemakers would make all the cheeses, and that way everybody has an understanding of how milk behaves and how curd develops in the different cheeses. And I think that's served us really well, because
is that normal in most dairies, or
No.
it isn't? You'd get one person making one cheese.
I would say outside of the UK, it's extraordinary to produce a hard cheese, a soft cheese, a blue cheese, and a water wine cheese in one dairy. I mean, outside the UK, that is almost unheard of. You'll get big dairy, you'll get a cheesemaker making soft cheese, a cheesemaker making a blue cheese, a cheesemaker making a hard cheese. Very few will do 4 completely different cheeses. And then even within places that do make more than one type of cheese, they nearly always have a cheesemaker specializing in a type of cheese. And so I think it is really unusual, but I think it is really, I compare it to, the England cricket team warming up by playing football or something. I think it really helps your understanding of, in the cricketer's sense, coordination of all kinds. But, in the cheesemaker sense, milk is always different. I mean, the thing about having a single herd of cows is that they might be in a field with a herb-rich ley. So we're part of the high-level environmental stewardship scheme, and some of our fields are rich in herbs. They might be in a field that's almost solid with buttercups and daisies, because being an organic farm, we have far more weeds than we really would like to have. They might be in a field that's very rich in clover, or they might be, eating spring grass, which is very juicy and wet, or autumn grass, which is very dry, or the silage in the winter, which is very juicy. And as they eat those different fodder, their milk changes. And it's not just the percentages of protein and butterfat that's changing. It's also just the fundamental, if you like, texture of the milk. And that has an impact on the texture of the cheese. And so the cheesemakers, we need to be adapting the way we make the cheese all the time to try and make a consistent end product. It will always vary a little bit through the seasons, but the cheesemakers have to vary the way it's done in order to try and make it consistent enough.
That must be very difficult to tinker with the recipe literally every day.
Yes, absolutely. And it's all about the feel of the cheese. It's all about having your hands in the curd, feeling the cheese, tasting the curd, and adapting what you're doing. So, if it is feeling too, so for example, the curd on the blue cheese, the following morning, it is absolutely critical that it is sticky, but not too sticky. And so if it is too wet and too soft, then we may choose to cut the curd again, and even to turn the curd over to give it another hour to dry out a little bit more and to firm up a little bit more and give the bacteria a little bit more time to play its part on the cheese. And I mean, one of the interesting things about blue cheese is we all think of blue cheese as being popular at Christmas because, Christmas is a time where you want rich food in the middle of winter, sitting by a fire. It's nice to have blue cheese. But actually, the real reason why blue cheese is popular at Christmas is that it's easiest to make a really good blue cheese from the milk from cows that have been eating dry grass at the end of summer. And for some reason, that milk that comes from cows that have been eating that dry grass at the end of summer, it's easier to get that texture of the curd just right so that you get a firm cheese that holds together but maintains a nice open texture for the blue mold to go through it. And of course, 12 weeks after the end of summer, so the 12 weeks after September, is December. And so hence in December, there's always been the best quality Stilton available in December. And so actually the reason why Stilton's popular at Christmas is because it's best made with milk made from cows grazing at the end of the summer.
But do you actually put on the calendar so you know that milk will be very good for the blue, so you make a lot more blue that time of year, or are we making the same amount each month?
Well, I don't know why it is, and maybe it's a reason why these cheeses are popular, but it just so happens that the maturing period of our cheeses tends to coincide So the best time to make them and then mature the cheese coincides with nearly all the cheeses with Christmas. So the best time to make blue cheese is in August and September when the grass is drier. And that is then our winter stock for Christmas, which is when we sell the most blue cheese. We sell the most of all our cheese at Christmas time. The gooeyest and most flavoursome soft cheese is made when the cows are first on the winter silage. And they start their winter silage in late October, early November. And 8 weeks after that, again, is the December period. So it's when they're changing their diet to the richer winter silage that we get that gooier soft cheese. So again, at Christmas time, we have our best soft cheese. And on the Wife of Bath, really the most floral flavours we get on the Wife of Bath is from the Wife of Bath that we're making kind of at this time of year where the grass is growing really strongly and you've got lots of wildflowers in the mix as well. And our Wife of Bath we then ripen for 5 to 6 months. But I mean, with the Wife of Bath particularly, we did experiment with different lengths of maturity. So it may be that although we didn't consciously do it, maybe we fixed the maturing date at about 5 to 6 months so that we had the best cheese in time for our big Christmas rush.
So what you're actually saying is that your business model was perfect, and you got everything made just at the right time.
What I'm saying is we're very lucky. But it's just occurred to me, we haven't talked about wine for the blue cheese yet.
No, we haven't. So once again, we've got the Carignan. If we want to have a little bit of the Carignan again. I think that's delicious. Just, you know, the lovely red fruit to it, the subtlety, the vanilla coming through. Then have some of the cheese.
And so again, you're looking at how well diffused through the cheese the blue mold is, that it's still vivid and bluey green rather than going too grey. And when you bite into that cheese, really wash it on your mouth. And just, Richard, to delay you for 1 second more, with the blue cheese, particularly as you get towards the rind, you get the softer curd and the creamier texture. And on the rind, you've got a real mix of molds and bacterias and yeasts, and that can give a lovely biscuity flavour as well. So try a piece from the centre, where it's more crumbly, and then try a piece from the outside, where you might pick up on slightly more ammonia, but also yeasty, biscuity flavours as well.
So this is why I've chosen the Carignan, specifically for that. This is the one wine that doesn't really enhance the flavour of the cheese or the wine or change it that much. I just think it's a very subtle marriage. You get that lovely bit of saltiness, and then, as you're saying, that biscuitiness, which works really, really well with the oak staves that are put in the steel tank. So you're getting more of that vanilla-iness coming through. And I think that the blue actually fills out the red. It kind of gives it a bit more body, makes it a bit richer. What are your thoughts, Hugh?
It does. No, I think it's really nice. It's a nice, the creaminess of the blue seems to balance really nicely against the flavour of the red.
Our blue does go very well with port, which is the classic for Christmas. But I always think that port can be slightly overpowering, especially with that creamy, lovely saltiness, because our blue is quite supple. And so try a lighter red, something like a Carignan, not too full-bodied, and I think works very, very well. Or once again, as I say, I know I'm a bit of a sherry lover, but blue and sherry goes very well. And a nice Amontillado, which is medium dry, works perfectly well.
Yeah. Is there any cheese that you don't like sherry with, Richard? Just checking, because you are quite a big fan of sherry, aren't you?
I am a big fan of sherry. Yes,
you and my grandmother.
People do laugh at me about my lust for sherry, but
I wish my grandmother was still alive so I could quiz her on whether she always had it, because she was a big fan of sherry, but I could still ask her if she paired her cheese with sherry a lot.
But did your grandmother make any other cheeses, or was it just cheddar?
Well, so it was my great grandmother that made the cheddar, but my grandmother taught cheese making. And well, I'll tell you now quickly, there was a lovely story. My grandmother was when she was learning cheese making at college, she told my father with a twinkle in her eye that there was a boy that she fancied on the course. And when they were making a cheese, a bit like a wife of Bath, which involves putting your arms right into the curd and stirring up the curd to keep it moving while you're agitating it, the boy reached over and held her hands under the surface of the curd, which is such a romantic picture. But anyway, that wasn't my grandfather, so maybe I should be thankful they didn't get together, or I wouldn't exist.
Once again, talking about the AHO earlier on, I don't think they'd like that either.
No, but I don't know, holding hands. I mean, there's nothing wrong with holding hands. But no, I think that's a lovely combination.
Yeah, no, to be fair, I think all the cheeses and the two wines work very, very well together.
Well, look, I think that brings us to the end of our session tonight. Look, I hope everyone has really enjoyed our cheese and wine tasting. If you do have any questions, we haven't really learned how to take questions whilst doing a Facebook Live session. So do feel free to email those in to sales@parkfarm.co.uk. And we hope you have a lovely evening and enjoy your cheese and wine.